everyone, I'm so glad to be back with you all this week. This week we're going to continue our series about emotions. Last week we talked about anger, and this week we're going to talk about disgust. What does it mean to be disgusted by something? What does it mean to be disgusted by things other people do? How does this relate to our faith? So I want to jump right into our story, which is going to be an adaptation from the book of Exodus, chapter 7 through 10, which is also known as the story of the 10 plagues. When Moses and his brother Aaron got to Egypt, the Lord told them what to do. God said, "Go to Pharaoh and tell him to let the Israelites go. He will be very stubborn, and it will take many signs and miracles before he will let you go. But everyone will know that I am God when he finally frees the Israelites." So they did what God asked, and they went to see Pharaoh. In front of Pharaoh, Aaron threw down his staff, and it became a snake, just as God told Moses it would. Pharaoh didn't look surprised at all. He actually just smiled at Moses and Aaron. Without a word, he snapped his fingers, and a minute later, men walked in. Pharaoh whispered in one of the men's ears, and he nodded and spoke quietly to the others. All at the same time, they threw their staffs they were carrying to the ground, and they became snakes too, just like Moses and Aaron's. They turned and looked at each other with disappointment. They realized that these men were Pharaoh's magicians. Just as Moses was feeling defeated, his snake swallowed up all the other snakes. This made Moses smile. Surely Pharaoh would let them go now. But Pharaoh didn't seem to care. He shook his head and said, "Nice try, but the Israelites belong to me, and they work for Egypt. I will not let them go." Moses left disappointed and went to talk to God about what to do next. After all, God told them it wouldn't be easy. So when God spoke next, they listened. God said, "Pharaoh's heart is hard. He's still not going to change his mind. Go see him tomorrow morning. He didn't listen today, but I will continue to show him that I am God." With their instructions from God, Moses and Aaron met Pharaoh the next morning. Aaron explained to Pharaoh, "Because you still won't listen, God is going to change all the water in Egypt to blood. The fish will die, the river will stink, and none of the Egyptians will be able to drink it." Pharaoh smirked and said, "Go ahead." So Aaron did what the Lord told him and put his staff into the water, and it turned to blood. Pharaoh seemed a little surprised, but he summoned his magicians, and they also turned water into blood. With that, Pharaoh's heart became hard, and he turned and walked back to his palace. The fish died, the water smelled bad, no matter where you could smell it. Can you imagine turning on your tap water at home and having blood come out? It's disgusting. Of course, the Egyptians didn't have sinks and toilets back then, but they still used water to drink, to make food, and to clean with. After a whole week of this, Pharaoh still wouldn't let the people go. The Lord instructed Aaron and Moses to go see Pharaoh once again and told them, "Tell Pharaoh to let my people go. If he refuses to let them go, I will plague the whole country with frogs." They did as God asked, and Pharaoh once again refused to let the people go. So Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came and covered everything. The frogs were everywhere, in the stoves where they cooked, in their beds, and they even jumped on the people. But the magicians could also make frogs appear. But this would be the last time that their magic would work. After a day of this, Pharaoh couldn't take it anymore, and he called for Moses and Aaron. He begged Moses, "Pray to the Lord to take the frogs away from me and my people, and I will let your people go." So Moses prayed to the Lord, and all the frogs went. But when Pharaoh saw that all the frogs were gone, he was relieved, and his heart hardened and changed his mind. There were many other plagues that followed: gnats and flies. All the livestock got sick and died. The Egyptians were covered in sores. Hail came down and killed all the crops. Locusts came and ate all the grass and everything green. And then there was complete darkness. Nobody left their homes because they couldn't even see where they were going. With each of these plagues, Pharaoh said he would let the Israelites go if God puts things back to normal, but then he would change his mind. There was one last plague, the 10th plague, that was way worse than any of the others. The Lord told them, "This will be the last plague on Pharaoh and Egypt. After this, he will let them go. Around midnight, I will go throughout Egypt. Every firstborn son in Egypt will die, even the son of Pharaoh, and there will be great sadness." Moses and Aaron warned Pharaoh, but again he refused to listen. God gave him many opportunities to listen to let the Israelites go, but Pharaoh would not listen. That night, God sent through the land, killing every firstborn son, except of those who observed Passover. God was able to know this because they were instructed to place blood of a lamb on the outside of the door. After Pharaoh realized what happened in Egypt, he called for Moses and Aaron just after midnight, and he said to them, "Leave my people, you and all the Israelites. Go, worship the Lord as you wanted. Take all your animals and get out of here." This story is full of many different characters and actions, but for today and for our lesson, I want us to focus on these plagues. There were 10 of them, if you remember. If not, I'll go through them really quick. The 10 plagues were water to blood, frogs, lice, flies, diseases, boils, hail, locusts, darkness, and the death of the firstborn son. Some of those are really gross. Can you imagine flies everywhere? Locusts, frogs? But all these plagues were to remind and send a sign to say, it is not okay to enslave these people. It is right to let them go. So what does this have to do with our faith? Well, I invite you to think about how disgust reminds you of different parts of your life and things you should do. It's no secret that right now we're having to be at a more heightened level of our own safety, wearing masks, washing hands, not going certain places, staying certain distances, not hugging people. The thought of touching someone who maybe hasn't washed their hands, it's disgusting. It's gross. It makes you feel icky. But that feeling of grossness and disgust reminds you to wash your own hands, to care for yourself. That may be fear, but also disgust of not knowing what other people have done or touched, or who's sneezing out loud, or maybe not covering their cough, reminds us to also care for others. That just because someone else isn't wearing a mask doesn't mean we don't. Just because someone else isn't washing their hands doesn't mean we don't. Just because people are hugging all over each other doesn't mean we go out and hug everyone else. That feeling of disgust can be good. It can remind us of how to love ourselves and how we, especially right now, should love others. So when you get that feeling that something's gross, it's nasty, you don't want anything to do with it, I invite you to think, why do I feel that way? Why am I feeling all like something's crawling on me, all grossed out? Is it to remind myself of something about the way I treat others or should be treating myself? So this last week, I invited you to think about anger, to notice the times when you were angry, and if forgiveness was needed or you needed to forgive someone else. This week, I invite you to check in on yourself every time you feel gross or disgusting, and to ask yourself, why am I feeling this way? And how should I react? We talk all the time about love because love is that important. If I feel grossed out, what is that telling me about the way I should love myself or love others right now? I hope you all have a great week. And next week, we're going to talk about our third emotion, fear. What does it mean to be fearful? And how do we react?